When two respected businessmen with ties to English royalty fall victim to gem thieves, it reveals a crime with more facets than anyone imagined. New York City is a place where fortunes have been made and lost. Sometimes in an instant. On March 2nd, 1990, the front desk at New York's posh Halloran House Hotel received a frantic call for help.
Right up here.
Two guests in room 1207 had been tied up and robbed at gunpoint. Their assailant had fired his gun at them before ransacking the room safe. The victims, Darius Guppy and Benedict Marsh, were devastated. As the proprietors of a fledgling gem business, they'd flown all the way from London to New York to sell their entire inventory. They had stored $4.5 million worth of rubies, sapphires, and emeralds in their room safe.
Millions of dollars, 1.8 million in there.
And now, those jewels were gone.
They didn't get the clothes, they got the jewels.
Are the police coming?
Yes, they are. They're around. Thank you.
Just
Security? Okay.
The victims were shaken but unhurt.
Detective, these two gentlemen right here was robbed earlier.
Science, Burke, NYPD. This policewoman will escort you out.
Gentlemen, step outside,
Guppy
please.
and Marsh were taken to the station, while the NYPD sealed the crime scene.
Detective, earlier I came in here approximately about 10 minutes ago. First gentleman was laid down, face down to the bed. Also, detective, a hotel clerk did use
A pillow that appeared to have been used to muffle the sound of the shot lay next to the bed. Despite a thorough search of the crime scene, New York police came away empty-handed. The only fingerprints belonged to the victims. As Guppy and Marsh each told police, they had come to New York as entrepreneurs.
What was the first thing that happened? You were eating your sandwiches and then...
Well, the first thing that happened was
Before leaving London, they'd made appointments with several jewelry buyers, hoping to sell their stones.
we talked on the telephone.
Yeah.
We have some jewels for you. We've traveled a long way.
I guess we need to take a look at them.
Yes.
Marvelous stones they are, rarest in India.
The buyers were respectful, and the meetings were friendly.
Well, that one's a little higher.
But they weren't interested in the stones.
I tell you what, my partner will leave you our number.
After all their preparation, the budding entrepreneurs weren't having much luck.
Well, that's fine if you want to do that.
Okay.
But I'm just not interested right now.
All right, thank you, chap.
You're welcome.
Guppy told police that after their meetings, they returned to their hotel room, disappointed but not defeated.
I could try.
Make sure you order room service. All right, I tell you what.
Marsh put the gems in the room safe, while Guppy ordered sandwiches from room service.
A ham sandwich? You sure you don't want the tuna melt?
It only took a few minutes for their lunch to arrive.
Thank you.
After that, the pair kicked back to enjoy their meal and regroup. Just then, they heard another knock at the door. Two armed robbers burst inside.
On the bed. Down on the bed.
They tied up the terrified Englishman and insisted they hand over the key to the safe. When Marsh failed to respond, one of the robbers fired a gun. The shot barely missed his head.
Up. Now. I'm getting up.
The gunman once again demanded the keys to the safe. The frightened jewel merchants told the robbers where the key was. And the criminals helped themselves to the safe.
I am trying to tell you that
Come on, man, let's get out of here.
Just as quickly as they had arrived, the robbers were gone. The stunned victims struggled to their feet and made their way to the phone to call the front desk.
In retrospect, do you think it was advisable?
Detective Raymond Burke investigated the case.
He knocked on the door and said it was the bell.
I call this a push-in robbery. And a push-in robbery is just that. You'll get pushed into your residence, in this case, a hotel room. 1990 was a high crime time for New York City. We had a lot of street robberies, including a lot of street robberies of jewel merchants. Never a push-in into a hotel room or to a residence of a jewel merchant. So that was very unusual.
Police theorized that Guppy and Marsh had been targeted. Someone must have known they had the gems and followed them back to their hotel. The NYPD created a sketch of one of the robbers from the victim's description. For the time being, it was all they had to go on.
These are what we call mugshot books. Probably heard of
The
them.
Englishmen were unable to identify their assailants from hundreds of mugshots.
Normally at the end of such an ordeal as going through all these photographs, you may have 20, 30 photographs sitting in front of you left on the side, and then we'll start doing a process of elimination. And, oh, it can't be him because he's got brown eyes, or it can't be him because he's got a scar and this guy didn't have a scar. We had nothing to look at. There was no one in there for either one of them.
Police began to suspect the thieves were not local. With $4.5 million in jewels at stake, maybe the crooks had followed them all the way from England. The NYPD asked Guppy and Marsh to stay in New York for a few more days in case the police got a break. But the initial investigation yielded few clues. Jeff Edwards covered the story in Britain for the Daily Mirror.
And after a couple of days, the police said to Guppy and Marsh, look, we're very sorry for what's happened to you. You come here as visiting businessmen coming to our city, and it's a terrible thing that's happened. We'll let you know you're free to go.
Days after the robbery, Darius Guppy and Benedict Marsh returned home. They left behind $4.5 million in gems and their dream of becoming successful entrepreneurs. In New York, the search for the two men who stole $4.5 million from Benedict Marsh and Darius Guppy continued. NYPD detective Raymond Burke knew it would be a difficult job.
After they leave, you have the great sigh of relief that your complainants have finally left, the office anyway. You can go back to work, and in this case, that's going back over your crime scene photographs. That's looking at your evidence, and that's documenting the interviews that you've already done, and that's going out to figure out what other interviews still have to be done.
Police followed up on the only lead they had. In Brooklyn, a man had been shot to death when he was mistaken for a jewel merchant. Police thought Guppy and Marsh might have been victims of this same robber. If so, they were lucky to be alive.
sketch I want you to take a look at.
No one in the area recognized the man Guppy and Marsh described in the sketch. Police had very little to work with, but Burke remained confident the missing gems would lead them to the thieves.
This was going to break eventually. You don't steal $4.5 million and nobody hears about it again. Those gemstones had to be sold. They were going to pop up somewhere, or somebody was going to get arrested and he was going to immediately give up his buddy. And that's the way most cases break.
Detectives tried to force a break by visiting the gem buyers Marsh and Guppy met with prior to the robbery.
Heard about.
Yep.
This composite sketch
None
was put
recognized the
together
sketch of the
by a couple of
suspect,
victims.
No, I haven't
but they did remember the victims.
See, the thing about this is it was
Most jewelers remembered them coming in, showing some stones, weren't interested. Nothing that stood out too much except for one jeweler who remembered them because they were British, and he didn't deal with many British merchants.
Back in England, Darius Guppy and Benedict Marsh tried to get their company back on its feet. Although their entire inventory of gemstones had been stolen, they were insured through Lloyd's of London.
Mr. Schwartz said it was relatively important to call him back.
Normally, an insurance company won't pay out an insurance claim immediately. They want to see how the investigation progresses in case of fraud. In this case, Lloyd's told me they would pay out immediately to Guppy and Marsh because of who they were. I asked who they were, and they replied, well, Darius Guppy is very well known in England, socialite, explained his great-grandfather was the explorer who discovered the fish, and that Marsh's father was an extremely wealthy man in Great Britain.
Darius's great-grandfather discovered the fish that now bears his family name. Darius Guppy was from one of England's finest families. Indeed, the society pages were invented for men like Guppy. He came from a respected British lineage and had more than a passing acquaintance with Lady Diana. In his days at Eton, he'd become good friends with her brother, Charles Spencer. Jeff Edwards covered the royals for the Daily Mirror.
He had been the best man to Earl Spencer, the brother of the Princess of Wales, at his wedding. So he'd come very much into the public limelight because of that event. He was one of the top 1% of British society. He was a true, almost a blue blood. He was somebody who you would have expected to be a captain of industry, a member of Parliament, possibly a member of the House of Lords.
But instead, Darius chose to make a name for himself and start a business with his good friend Benedict Marsh, a business that had nearly been destroyed by a New York robbery. Months later, things were starting to look up. Their insurers had paid their claim in record time, and their business was back in the black. Guppy and Marsh felt optimistic for the first time in months. They had no idea of the trouble that lay ahead. 1 year after Darius Guppy and his partner were robbed in a New York hotel room, the case would take a bizarre turn. In March 1991, Scotland Yard detectives arrested a man named Peter Risdon in an unrelated gem theft.
All right, then. Peter Risdon. With
Desperate to negotiate a reduced sentence, Risdon promised to tell them an interesting story.
What sort of men were they? You say they were businessmen?
So he said to the detectives, look, can I cut a deal here? If I tell you about something else that I know about, that I was involved in, something very serious, maybe I can get the charges dropped to lesser ones, or can get some help here. So the police say, well, what is it you want to tell us?
Risdon told police he ran a spy store that specialized in counter-surveillance equipment, miniature cameras, and custom-built cases to conceal documents.
London.
What are you saying exactly, Mr. Risden?
In 1988, two men walked into his store,
Hey, boys.
Darius Guppy and Benedict Marsh. At the time, India outlawed the importing of gold. The young blue bloods had devised a scheme to smuggle gold into India, and they needed false bottom cases to do it.
See the stuff inside? Give it a good pull.
Like I said, the bottom will come out. We need a foot.
This is all documents here. You see that right there?
The idea was to sell it, where I think on the black market it could achieve quite high sums.
What exactly is your role in this then, Risden?
Police were skeptical. Men like Risden ran in very different circles than the well-bred gem brokers.
In a hotel.
You broke into their room?
That's right, it was a fake robbery where I'd go in with a gun and tied them up. Gem.
Still, they looked more deeply into Guppy's background. When Guppy started his gem dealing business, he knew almost nothing about gems.
What you bought a gin earlier, sir? Yesterday, maybe?
His father had lost a great deal of money in a bad business deal, and Guppy was desperate to find a way to make his own fortune. He attracted investors, like Marsh's father, by using the government's business enterprise plan, which gave tax breaks to investors in high-risk businesses. And the volatile gem market was very high risk.
Having its certification from the government under the business enterprise scheme, they needed to show that the company was trading and trading successfully, and it wasn't at all. And as a result of that, they had a very large gap in their books.
To make up the gap, Marsh and Guppy used the profits from their gold smuggling enterprise to purchase gemstones. The extra cash ensured they always showed a profit. The gold scheme proved to be a profitable but temporary solution.
Hold on one second. Hold on just a second.
Rumors began to circulate India would soon allow gold to be imported legally.
Just open the market so anyone can bring it in. The market's just free to anyone. All right.
Guppy and Marsh panicked.
What's that all about?
Police learned that when the smuggling money dried up, they needed a new way to keep their company afloat. Risden claimed Darius Guppy and Benedict Marsh hired him to help stage a gem heist in New York City.
All the money in the gold bars.
He claimed he had no idea they would defraud Lloyd's of London out of millions.
I'm gonna get money for this because it's an insurance claim. I'm gonna defraud the Lloyd's of London.
That's right. Well, you told us we think...
Scotland Yard detectives contacted the NYPD to learn that the gemstone robbery remained unsolved.
The British police came on the scene and suggested to the NYPD that it wasn't a robbery at all and the whole thing was a fake, and the NYPD, had in fact been taken as suckers.
Intrigued, Detective Burke brought Risden to New York for further questioning.
So this was a setup from the whole beginning. Marsh Guppy knew about the entire thing. How much were you supposed to be cut in?
It was a flat fee, but obviously...
Risden simply knew too much to be faking his story.
Now, Scotland Yard, although having privy to some of the information on the case, hadn't actually gone through our case, our reports or our documents, even our photographs. And so prior to anyone giving Risden information, I sat him down and asked him exactly what happened, what he stated happened, and to describe things. And he went in complete detail, down to the color of the bedspreads in that room.
Do you think you can find this lake again?
I could try.
It seemed he was telling the truth.
I suppose.
Police now knew the details of the entire scheme. Not only was the robbery bogus, so were half the gems. Forged paperwork turned costume jewels into million-dollar gemstones.
There are the sapphires.
Based on the fraudulent appraisals and Guppy's family reputation, Lloyd's of London insured them heavily.
President? Yes, he is.
After arriving in New York, Guppy and Marsh met with the Fifth Avenue gem buyers.
All right.
I tell you what, my partner will leave you our number and where we're staying, and you can get in touch with us if you decide to change your mind.
Well, that's fine if you want to do that. Okay. But I'm just not in the market.
Then they headed to the hotel. Risden arrived around 2 p.m., right on
We
schedule.
got old room service, right? So you go wait in the bathroom there.
After a lunch of sandwiches, they launched their elaborate plan. Risden could have simply tied them up and staged the robbery, but Guppy insisted that the whole charade be performed from start to finish.
Make sure you have the gun hidden.
They staged the room as a play, and they acted out the play, and it was a brilliant thing to do. The purpose of this was, in the event that the NYPD polygraphed them, put them on a lie detector test, that they could recall events actually as they happened, and the polygraph would say they were telling the truth. So they had Risden go through the motions of a robbery, knocking on the door saying room service, opening the door, forcing them on the beds, and firing the gun into the bed. They thought this would negate any polygraph test.
Shut up! Boy, you get up! Get up!
Need a chauffeur around 5 o'clock.
When the men returned to London, they filed an insurance claim for nearly £2 million.
New York Airport. JFK, yes, JFK.
But the caper wasn't finished.
Get in here so we can get our business done.
The men had thrown away the fake gems. The real ones were still hidden in a safety deposit box in New York.
Need any help, just let me know.
The day after they received the insurance check, they took the Concorde back to Manhattan, retrieved the gems, and returned to London the same day. They quickly sold the gems, increasing their take from the scam. It was the perfect crime. At least until Risden confessed. In July 1991, Guppy and Marsh were arrested for fraud in England.
It was a crime of only a half a dozen key moves. He knew that he could get false receipts for gemstones that were of a certain value, showing that they were worth a lot more. He was also certain that he was such a clever guy that by taking the stones first into the gems market in New York, he would create, if you like, an alibi for himself. He would create witnesses who would say, yes, he was here and those stones were here. Thus, we know the stones were in New York. And then he also thought that the police were foolish, that they were easy meat, that they would swallow any story he gave them.
On March 25, 1993, Darius Guppy and Benedict Marsh were sentenced to 5 years for fraud. Marsh was released in 1995 after serving only 2 years. Guppy also served a fraction of his sentence, spending 3 years in a minimum security prison. He was released in 1996. Peter Risden avoided prosecution by cooperating with the authorities.
These were two young men who were not professional criminals at all. They were ambitious young men who longed for adventure and on the wrong side of the tracks. So an awful lot of what they did was very well conceived and carried out.
So well conceived that out of the estimated $5 million the men smuggled and defrauded over an 18-month period, less than $1 million has ever been recovered.
I say these have made us a lot of...
A cunning jewel thief leads police on a chase that spans the globe and lasts decades. Authorities all over the world seem powerless as they pursue a brilliant woman they will come to know as the Queen of Jewels. barbed wire fences of the Colorado State Correction Facility hold some of America's most cunning criminal minds, including a thief implicated in more than 400 jewel heists. Louise Davis, the Queen of Jewels.
I thought I could get away with anything. Let's say go into a fine store, and I'm speaking hypothetically, and just say you walk out with a $100,000 diamond ring that is of great quality. I just thought I could get away with it, because I did.
During the course of her career, Louise Davis has stolen millions of dollars in precious gems from some of the finest stores in the world. She remembers the beginning of that career as a young black woman growing up in Slab Fork, West Virginia.
Well, hey, Louise, how you doing?
I'm fine. Mom told me.
Oh,
And she remembers the day her mother sent her to the store to settle a bill.
My mom told me that if I make straight A's, I can get a watch.
Oh, that's nice.
While she was there, a watch caught her eye.
That's a good one. It's pretty. I think you're gonna like it.
The store owner allowed her to try on the watch.
Yeah, well, how you been anyway?
And he treated me so nice, and I was quite proud of the way he was treating me. And a man, a white man,
See another one you might like?
entered the store.
This one here? Hi, Bob.
His whole everything changed. He was no longer patient. He was no longer nice.
All right, you just run on home there.
Forgetting Louise had the watch, the man pushed her away.
Come on in here. How you doing today, my friend? Doing fine.
For an impressionable young girl, the incident would mark the beginning of her lifelong pursuit.
I know I have this watch on, and I'm kind of miffed at the manner in which he has changed on me. And I'm not going to give him this watch back at the counter. I'm not going to do that.
Thank you a lot.
Louise changed her mind and gave the watch back. But the incident gave her immediate insight into the way people work.
Based upon what happened in the store, I know how to go in another store and cause the jewelry man to forget I have his watch. And I went from this store to this store to this store until I made it happen.
It was a lesson Davis would call upon in the years to come. By the time she was a young woman, Davis's life was in chaos. She was divorced. She was unemployed. And she had a family to support. She decided her only option was to steal her way out of trouble. But first, she had to reinvent herself. Davis read fashion magazines like how-to manuals. Now that she had the right look, she needed the right education. High-end jewelry stores became her classrooms. Davis listened closely as sales clerks talked about gems. She observed the mannerisms of their well-to-do customers. Once she had seen how the game worked, she knew she could play it.
I never felt like I had to get confidence. I never felt like I was lacking in anything that I needed in order to go into a fine jewelry shop.
But even her confidence could not overcome the suspicions of store clerks. Davis realized she would never be thought of as well-to-do in the United States. So she went to Europe. In 1974, Davis found herself in Monte Carlo, the glistening jewel of the Riviera. She headed straight for Casino Square. There she found exactly what she was looking for. The most expensive jewelry stores in the world. As she entered the first exclusive salon, she charmed the sales clerks to establish her persona, a woman of exacting tastes and the money to support them. As the clerks hurried to accommodate her, she simply waited for the right moment to strike.
Hello, sir.
When the salesman left her alone with a tray of rings, she quietly made her move.
These days, your typical jewel thief, comes into a jewelry store with a mask and a shotgun and an accomplice and a hammer, and they break open the cases, get as many gems as they can, terrorize the patrons, and then get out of there. She was kind of elegant in what she did.
After she had taken the ring, she calmly departed. A taxi waited out front. Once safely away, she examined the ring more carefully. Everything she knew told her this was no ordinary ring.
I knew something was amiss. It was too much. It was costly to the point that there was going to be an all-out dragnet.
There was no sign of the police when she arrived at the airport. Louise purchased a ticket to Geneva, the first flight out of the country. She sat and waited, wondering how long it would take for the jeweler to notice the ring was missing. But it was already too late.
We are with the police.
Is there a problem, officer?
We're not quite sure.
Louise Davis was taken into custody by French authorities. The policemen grew frustrated. They had nabbed their suspect, but the ring was nowhere to be found. Louise had been searched several times, but she used sleight of hand to transfer it from one hiding place to another. The ring was never discovered.
Eventually, I go to jail. Every day or every other day, they would come looking for it. And every day I had it. I thought about throwing it away. I thought about giving it to them. And the attorney told me it wouldn't make any difference. Don't.
If she was going to keep it, she had to hide it. Louise requested a pair of nail clippers. She used them to pry the diamond from its setting.
Then I got me some thread, black thread and a needle. I put the diamond in the panty girdle loop, and I whip stitched it.
She wore the girdle every day, only taking it off to wash it.
And I wore it, wet or dry. I never was out of it.
Several months later, Davis and another prisoner were taken to a city clinic for a routine physical exam. The moment she entered the building, Davis started looking for a way out.
Is there a ladies' room around here? Right there.
She asked to use the restroom. Davis had trained herself to act quickly. This might be her only chance to escape. She did not hesitate. As Davis left the hospital, she spotted a man getting into a car. She knew she was home free. He would not be the first man taken in by her charm.
Where you from?
nor would he be the last.
He drove me to over into Belgium, and that's where I went and got the passport. I just got out of there quick. I left that day.
She made her way to London. The polite young girl who grew up in the poverty of coal mining towns now mingled with European high society. Davis called them her bubbas. It was her nickname for rich people who gave her the instant credibility she needed.
We window shopped close to closing time in the fine salon areas. I made sure the people inside saw me with Bubba. And then I would go alone.
Being seen with the rich assured her entree into the most exclusive shops. She was always greeted by a very helpful sales staff. Every time she was in the store, she used the same ploy. It was brilliant in its simplicity.
She would engage the proprietor in conversation and ask to look at certain rings or certain pieces of jewelry, and would spend a significant amount of time discussing the quality of the gems and all that kind of stuff. And during the course of that, she'd slip on her finger a valuable stone, and then she'd look at it and then continue talking with the owner of the store. And at some point, she'd ask to excuse herself for a minute, either to go find her husband or to go get her checkbook or something like that, and she'd walk out the store.
Louise Davis had become quite the jet setter. She would steal a ring in Europe and sell the goods in the United States. She concealed the merchandise from customs officials in ordinary containers. By the 1980s, Davis had managed to elude Interpol, Scotland Yard, and local authorities in scores of cities across the US and Europe. But her luck was about to run out. In 1982, Louise Davis was arrested for selling stolen merchandise in Tarrant County, Texas. The item in question was a 3-carat diamond ring worth nearly $32,000.
Okay, look straight at me. You okay, man? You have number 3.
At various times in her long career, she'd been arrested and put in jail. She never stayed for long. One evening, while awaiting trial, Louise complained of abdominal pains.
Goes number 3.
That would be great.
She was transferred to a hospital where she convinced a volunteer to uncuff her. It was all she needed. Davis spent another 5 years on the lam. The FBI finally caught up with her in 1987. She was sent to jail for 6 years. Nearly 60, she was released. But was Louise Davis ready to retire? Over the next 5 years, the Queen of Jewels crime wave continued. Then, in 1998, she set her sights on an upscale department store in Denver, Colorado. To the salesman in the store, the new customer was impeccably dressed, poised, and articulate. She seemed every inch a sophisticated woman of means. She told the clerk she was interested in purchasing a diamond bracelet and matching ring. He showed her several pieces. It would be his first mistake.
Most insurance companies do not permit more than one piece of jewelry to be shown at one time. But you cannot do that to someone that you think is millionaire.
Working with you today.
Well, thank you.
And I hope to see you again soon. Please come
After
back.
30 minutes, Davis said she couldn't make up her mind. She said she would return later that afternoon with her husband.
What'd you make up? She couldn't decide if she liked the size or the season. So, still up in the air. She said she has to go talk to her husband. Well, is there one of the rings over there?
The sales clerks finally realized the truth.
You don't think she might have taken a ring?
The lady was a thief.
Oh my God.
The police were called in. The suspect had been careful not to leave behind physical evidence. The stolen ring was large, 3 emerald-cut diamonds in a platinum setting. It weighed more than 5 carats and was worth $57,000. The officers relayed the suspect's description to Detective Gail Riddell, a 30-year veteran of Denver's Property Crimes Unit. Riddell had a hunch she knew who they were dealing with.
The physical description and the method of operation sounded very familiar to me because of a bulletin that we had received from the Jeweler Alliance Securities. So I went back through and found the bulletin and read it again, and it matched the method of operation, and the physical description was correct of the suspect.
The charming silver-haired grandmother was more than a thief. She was a one-woman crime wave. Riddell's 30 years on the force had taught her that thieves like Louise Davis move fast. The detective circulated a description of Davis to businesses in the Denver area. If Davis struck again, they'd be waiting. Officers were dispatched to the airport, but no one had seen the notorious Queen of Jewels. As officers searched for the suspect, Riddell looked into her past, and what a past it was.
When we put her into the computer to look at her record, it came out to be over 6 feet in length. I think we came up with 63, 64 arrests. From the information that I'd already received, this woman was more than big. She was enormous.
A judge granted an arrest warrant. Based on Davis's lengthy criminal record, bail was set at a hefty $1 million. Now all they had to do was catch her. Riddell suspected Davis had already left the state. The detective called the Federal Bureau of Investigation for help. Davis, she discovered, was no stranger to them. The FBI's Cleveland office led the Davis investigation. Her file listed her last known address as a home in an upper-middle-class Cleveland neighborhood.
Nothing here.
FBI agents searched her house. Davis was not there, but what they found intrigued them. Stashed inside the refrigerator was $10,000 in cash. It was the sign of a consummate professional. The refrigerator was probably one of many hiding places Davis kept in case she needed quick cash for a getaway. A box of forged passports confirmed their suspicions. Louise Davis was already on the move. And there was no telling where in the world she'd turn up.
I got a phone call from the FBI agent stating, you may not like this, but we got into her house and We found a lot of passports. All of her photos are there, but under variable names. And she left the country and came back in one day shortly after your theft. And I said, are you telling me the ring has already been taken to Europe? And he said, no, but I'm just getting you prepared that there is a possibility. But he said, we are working on another angle here, and we will keep you posted. And it was kind of like, as fast as we moved, she moved faster.
It was beginning to seem as if the Denver Police Department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation would be outwitted by a little old lady. It took a month, but the FBI finally got a break. A Cleveland pawnbroker recognized a photo of the stolen ring. He had recently sold it himself.
The receipt right here. Let me look at the receipt here.
FBI agents spoke with a man who bought the item.
Yeah. You have it with you? Just went out.
It was indeed the ring taken in Denver. Agents had recovered the stolen goods, but they were no closer to catching the perpetrator. A 68-year-old woman who was clearly still in her prime. Louise Davis had been on the lam for most of her life. She had eluded the FBI and Denver police detective Gail Riddell for over a month. In September 1998, Davis walked into another upscale store in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. This time, thanks to an alert sales clerk, she was not anonymous. The clerk checked a wanted poster sent out by the Denver police. She recognized the infamous Queen of Jewels. She called security. Gail Riddell finally got the call she had been waiting for. Louise Davis was in custody, but for how long?
I said, do not give her a bond. I said, my bond is $1 million on this case. And there was a hesitation on the other end. And I said, did you hear what I said? And he said, $1 million on this little old lady? And I said, yes, sir. I said, she is more than she appears. So please, you know, it's just everybody assumes from her demeanor and of her age that she is not a serious problem. And in fact, she really is.
This time, Louise didn't get away. And she was soon sitting in a police interrogation room opposite the woman who had finally stopped her.
I said, I want you to tell me how you did this. And she kind of stopped for a second. She looked at me and kind of smiled, and she said, you're the first detective that has ever asked me how I did it.
Can you tell me what you did with that ring?
The key, she said, was in her image.
Oh, certainly. All right.
Davis had built her career by mastering a shell game that played on the perceptions of others.
Describe him to your husband. Sure. My name is Kevin again.
Over and over, she performed the same con, and each time it worked.
Certainly. Goodbye.
I knew that I could have been just as successful on the straight and narrow. I did. I should have been a lawyer.
But Davis didn't choose the straight and narrow. In February 2000, she was found guilty of grand larceny. Louise is eligible for parole in 2004 and could even be released earlier on good behavior. A criminal conspiracy threatens to wipe out England's cultural heritage, one robbery at a time. Police struggle to catch an obsessed thief as artifacts worth millions disappear into London's underworld. In Great Britain in the 90s, the English began to appreciate art and antiquities as never before. As their interest escalated, prime pieces became more valuable. The price of art skyrocketed, and so did art theft. London, a city with the largest concentration of galleries and museums in the world, was particularly hard hit. Limited or outdated security systems were no match for dedicated thieves. On December 5th, 1993, a small private art gallery called the Nortman was targeted. The burglars were a highly trained group of thieves who made their entrance through a roof hatch in the building next door. Once inside, they used a sledgehammer to gain access to the gallery. They planned it perfectly. They smashed through the wall without damaging any of the hanging artwork. In a matter of a few minutes, the thieves stole 15 paintings, including 5 by famous Dutch masters. The loss of a Bruegel, a Marquet, and a Van Goyen would make headlines. Overall, the haul was worth nearly $2 million. The Nortman Gallery heist wasn't discovered until the next day. Inside the gallery, Scotland Yard detectives found no real clues, only the destruction the thieves left behind. Whoever pulled this job off knew exactly what they were after.
What's that picture down there, all right?
They had the opportunity to steal much more, but targeted specific paintings.
Tell you what, Constable. Take a walk next door, have a word with the owner of the building, see if they've got any.
The boldness of the thieves and the efficiency of the heist made news all over Britain. Scotland Yard detectives knew they were dealing with professionals who understood the art market and would know exactly how to move the stolen paintings.
That was taken from the Norton Gallery.
They would have to work quickly before the famous works disappeared overseas or into a private collection forever.
What do you think?
Investigators canvassed art dealers all over London's West End.
Mr. Raleigh?
They hoped one of the dealers had spotted the stolen paintings.
Copies of some of the pictures we're going
It was a long shot that didn't pan out.
Just catches you on the side. I'd appreciate if you
At the time of the Nortman heist, London was overrun with art thieves. In the 1990s, art and antiquity theft in Britain was second only to drug crimes in terms of profitability. Alexandra Smith, operations manager for Art Loss Register.
There was an enormous rise in art theft, and every few months it seemed to be a different type of theft that was being done.
Magazines and television shows had popularized the value of antiques. Even the smallest pieces were bringing enormous prices.
Where do we begin?
10
pounds?
People started taking notice of the treasures in their own homes.
I'll have to consult my client. 25.
I would think we're pushing the price.
Yes, I think
somewhere around 20 to 30,000 pounds.
Absolute top, yes.
How amazing.
Yep, it's a wonderful,
It's a wonderful thing, never seen before.
As police discovered, common criminals were also becoming art experts. Armed with information gleaned from books and periodicals, they could now identify antiques worth stealing.
We have heard, apparently, that the most popular book read in prison is The Miller's Antique Guide. So they are starting to educate themselves from prison.
This new breed of thief, the art criminal, was brazen and smart. They exploited weaknesses in their target's security, stole precisely what they came for, and then simply disappeared. The police couldn't keep up with the criminals. They simply did not have the resources or the expertise to deal with the billions of dollars of art stolen each year. Scotland Yard finally established a special squad to deal with the thefts. It covered London's extensive gallery and auction house district in the West End. Despite dedicating all their resources to the Nortman heist, police still had no clues. As the days turned into weeks, they began to wonder whether the paintings had been stolen to order.
Because at the end of the day, if they are stolen to order, the person who wants that work of art will keep it, and it won't ever surface again on the art market until perhaps he dies.
Stolen or otherwise from various museums.
It was becoming clear that if the paintings were hidden in someone's private collection, the Antiquities Squad might never see the missing paintings again.
Constable, follow me.
Weeks after 15 paintings worth nearly $2 million disappeared from the Nortman Gallery in London, police were no closer to finding the thieves.
Take a walk next door, have a word with the owner of the building, see if we got.
They were concerned for good reason. The bold crime was only one of many such robberies. Robberies that had now expanded from galleries to antique stores. Shops specializing in high-end antiquities fell prey to the cunning thieves. They broke in at night and snatched only the very best merchandise. Alarm systems were apparently no match for their expertise. Investigator Chris Roberts works undercover to find stolen antiquities.
The simple fact is that no matter what your security is, determined thieves, if they want to break through and steal, they will. And they can do it fairly quickly. Alarms, the response time to alarms, security cameras, all the gadgetry that modern man can invent, develop, and put into place, generally speaking, can't stop a determined crook.
The floodgates were open, the thefts continued, and the police were powerless to stop it. Art theft was big business, and Scotland Yard was overwhelmed. The Arts and Antiquities Squad tried to track stolen paintings, vases, china, and even furniture. They were only able to recover a small fraction of the stolen pieces.
We'll say we drop a couple of minor things.
But even those small successes generated leads.
You're not going to serve any time. We got a couple of outstanding warrants on you on that.
Police rounded up suspects and brought them in for questioning. Although they agreed to talk in exchange for lighter sentences, they turned out to be middlemen in a much larger scheme. Interrogation revealed the men had heard rumors of a mastermind, a highly educated art expert who had planned and executed the Nortman heist. But none of them knew his name.
Well, so much for Hamlet.
Scotland Yard would have been shocked to learn that Professor Richard Lucas was the man they sought.
And how else would you describe it, do you think? Blake, would you go on to
The tweedy intellectual did not fit the profile of a thief.
Thank you.
But Lucas lived a double life.
Today is Dryden's All for Love.
To his colleagues and neighbors, he was a respected
All's
educator.
Well that ends well. Both of them a sort of analogy for life.
Privately, however, he was a compulsive collector. When he wasn't teaching, he scoured antique shops, picking up all the treasures he could buy. Lucas collected virtually everything old, from books to clocks, from porcelain to fine art. He surrounded himself with hoarded treasure.
Yes, indeed.
He'd been educated very well in the private sector, so he wasn't short of money, but he seemed to live in an almost fantasy world where he lived in this tiny little flat, had to surround himself with beautiful objects, and be the only person who actually got to see them.
Lucas prowled the museums of London, coveting all that he saw, but knowing the things he wanted were beyond his grasp. The best pieces, the museum pieces, simply weren't for sale, at any price. But Lucas wouldn't accept that. He went to an antique dealer named Thomas Atkinson.
This is very nice indeed.
Atkinson had a shady reputation.
May I help you, gentlemen?
He assured the professor he could obtain the things he needed.
As I was saying, this is exactly the sort of thing I am very interested in.
Even if his methods were outside the law.
Now you see, Mr. Atkinson, these are very nice.
It was the perfect partnership.
Indeed.
Lucas provided his art expertise.
They are not the sort of thing we're interested in at all.
Atkinson would provide the thieves.
So do I.
Professor Lucas had his eye on a collection of Worcester vases displayed in a small London museum specializing in 17th century porcelain. Atkinson went to work. First, he assembled a gang of experienced thieves. The men studied the collection and photographed the layout of the museum where it was housed. Once surveillance was completed, the gang looked for weak points in the museum's security system. What once seemed like a complex job suddenly became old-fashioned burglary. It seemed too good to be true. Were they missing something? Atkinson decided to find out. Atkinson followed a museum employee to a pub he frequented. After a few pints of lager, they became fast friends.
I got it.
Atkinson learned that some of the collections in the museum weren't protected by electronic security measures. Atkinson and his accomplice, Leslie Mason, then walked into the museum with the only tool they would need: a bottle of solvent to dissolve a thin layer of adhesive that secured the vases to their display case. No alarm sounded. No security gates came crashing down. The men simply walked out with their prize. Robbing museums was easier than shoplifting, and London was full of museums.
I think that we can probably find...
The professor proudly displayed his precious vases. When the police arrived at the museum, they were perplexed. The thieves had taken 2 Worcester vases, worth thousands of dollars apiece.
Yeah, you saw what it
did with that. They just put some
But they
solvent on
hadn't touched the
bottom, more
rest of the valuable collection.
Yeah. We were in at 9.
What kind of thieves were they dealing with?
You almost kind of like leave together, you just finish it up.
The professor's obsession escalated. With Atkinson as his partner, he realized he could have anything he wanted. And what he wanted most of all was rare books.
Quite old, of course, 17th century.
Lucas had been a familiar face at the London Library's rare book room. There he'd pore over priceless old manuscripts, coveting every fragile page.
He was a fanatical collector and very passionate about old books and items that weren't owned by him. And the books that he specifically wanted, he couldn't actually buy on the open market.
Everyone at the library thought that Lucas was an eccentric old professor doing research. In reality, he was simply making a shopping list. Lucas charmed a librarian, convincing her to help him steal rare books. The result was the perfect blend of passion and profit. Lucas kept the books he wanted, and Atkinson sold the rest. Their inside source made certain no one would notice the books were missing. Libraries aren't known for their tight inventory control, nor are they the usual targets of crime. The simple plan worked flawlessly, and the thefts continued for months, book by priceless book. The hemorrhage of these national treasures continued until February 1994, when the head librarian received a letter. The anonymous sender claimed some of the library's rarest and most expensive volumes had been stolen. They were being sold on the open market. The librarian thought the letter was a hoax. He had no idea any of his volumes were missing. An inventory of the rare book room revealed the letter was no crank.
It seemed abundantly clear that quite a few books were missing from their secure library. And there was no way that these books should have been missing because members of the public couldn't actually take them out. They were to be viewed on the premises only.
Nearly 80 books, some of them 400 years old, were unaccounted for.
Especially with the 6-volume.
The theft seemed familiar.
400 years old.
Only the most valuable books were taken, and police were unable to trace them.
Someone might be able to walk out of a rare book room.
The librarian had no idea of how this could have happened.
Do you have a sign-in sheet when people come into the library?
At the time of the library heist, the arts and antiquities thefts were capturing national attention. Pressure mounted on Scotland Yard to find the missing items. Panicked museum owners scrambled to upgrade or install security systems.
So, Mr. Atkinson.
Emboldened by their success, Lucas and Atkinson hit their biggest target to date, the Nortman. The robbery went off without a hitch.
Yes, that was exactly right.
Lucas was thrilled with his new acquisitions. Atkinson was just as thrilled with his new money. Together, there was no telling where they could go or what they would acquire. In 1992, an English professor and a common crook teamed up to rob London's finest museums and galleries. They made off with some of the empire's greatest treasures. After weeks of working the case, police finally got a lead on an art handler named Robert Black. Investigators from the Arts and Antiquities Squad went undercover to see if Black would implicate himself.
We established a really good rapport. I was explaining to him that I would sell things on his behalf in Canada and the States, and I had some clients in South America. So he put together quite a collection of things.
Black liked to talk. Not only did he reveal he trafficked in stolen art, he gave investigator Roberts the information he had been waiting for.
He explained to me how they had broken into the Nortman Gallery. He showed me how they went along the tops of the walls. And in fact, he took me into a West End gallery and said to me, because we're getting on so well, pick anything on the wall here and I'll have it for you within a week.
Might have something in it.
Police got a warrant to search Black's house. Inside, they found information implicating him in thefts of stolen artwork. Still, Black refused to talk. He gave information on the Nortman heist, but he didn't know the location of the paintings. Police hit another dead end. In desperation, they publicized a reward for information leading to the return of the stolen paintings. An informant finally came forward. He told them about a house in the Swiss Cottage section of London's West End. A house that was supposedly filled with stolen antiquities.
How do you know about this place?
He said the home belonged to an English professor named Richard Lucas.
They grew too big and too successful, and every criminal in town knew about their activities. Every criminal who knew a police officer wanted a slice of the reward and the action.
Police took a close look at Richard Lucas. They learned that he was an Oxford-educated English professor, that he was a loner and an eccentric, and that he fancied himself an expert on antiques.
Good evening. Good evening, sir. Richard Lucas.
In September 1996, police arrived at the home of Richard Lucas. They were armed with a search warrant and accompanied by antique experts.
Yes, sir. We have a search warrant for your premises. You can take them upstairs. Thank you very much.
We entered the property not knowing really what to expect. And every surface that you could see was covered with little knickknacks and net skis and boxes and clocks. And it seemed very obvious that he was a fanatical collector. But were fairly shocked when we walked in to find that the staircase was littered with books. It was actually very difficult to actually walk up the stairs and enter the property.
It took more than 2 days to search his property and inventory the thousands of antiques and books worth nearly $1 million. To police, the most valuable book in Lucas's collection was one he had written himself. The compulsive collector was also a compulsive note-taker.
Come take a look at this.
He'd kept a log of the names of the men he'd hired to steal for him and detailed the crimes.
Look at this guard layout.
Among the priceless clutter, police also found one of the stolen Dutch master paintings from the Nortman Gallery.
Detective, look what I found.
What you got there, lad?
Eventually, the rest were found as well, scattered about as if they were old magazines.
Oh my God.
Detectives tried to find the rest of the gang.
Lots of people got my name in their books.
They questioned the men listed in Lucas's notebook.
So you've never had any dealings with us, Mr. Lucas?
All of them refused to cooperate,
Nothing to do with any antiques?
except one, Leslie
You've been a
Mason.
busy little boy, haven't you?
Mason finally broke under police questioning. The small-time burglar admitted he had been recruited by Atkinson and Lucas to help plan and execute the enormously profitable heists. In fact, over a 6-year period, the two masterminds recruited about 10 gang members to do their dirty work. With Mason's help, Thomas Atkinson and Richard Lucas were linked to 27 robberies between 1990 and 1996. In that period, they had stolen millions of dollars worth of art and antiquities. Police have only recovered less than a third of what was taken. Richard Lucas was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Thomas Atkinson received 6. The treasures that once lay at their fingertips are now mere pictures and books borrowed from the prison library. In the early 1960s, the Berlin Wall separates families, friends, and lovers. For Wolfgang Fuchs, Cold War politics were about to become fiercely personal. Wolfgang Fuchs and his fiancée Selina were typical young Berliners. Wolfgang lived in West Berlin, where he attended the university. Selina lived in the East. Like many young couples, they had to plan their future around a country divided by Cold War politics. In 1952, East Germany had officially closed the borders. The communists ruled the East, while the West was democratic. Still, travel remained unrestricted. Wolfgang and Selina, along with many Berliners, commuted across the border daily.
Appearing.
But as democratic West Germany prospered, communist East Germany suffered shortages. The consequences were inevitable. Throughout 1960, 200,000 East Germans defected to the West. The East German government knew they had to act, and act fast. Continued defections would devastate an already depressed economy. Maria Noki, a former resident of East Germany, now works for the Documentation Center for the Berlin Wall.
It was very evident that something had to be done to stop the escapes from East Germany. The escapees were young people, well-educated people. East Germany was losing its best citizens. It became clear in 1961 that the government had to stop this exodus.
The government solution would shock the entire world. On the night of Saturday, August 13th, 1961, Soviet and East German troops began sealing the 25-mile border between East and West Berlin. Like everyone else in Berlin that Sunday, Selina awoke to terrifying news. According to news reports on the radio, travel between East and West Germany was now blocked. She tried to call Wolfgang in West Berlin, but the lines were dead. Klaus Klein remembers hearing the news.
It didn't seem like a big problem. I thought we could get on the train, pull the emergency brake in West Berlin, and jump out. But it became clear when I learned the train doesn't even go into West Berlin anymore.
The East Germans had blocked all train travel and the 95 streets connecting the two parts of the city. Wolfgang Fuchs and Selina were now separated by armed guards and barbed wire. He knew he had to move quickly if he was to rescue Selina. In the early days, the borders weren't thoroughly protected. With Wolfgang's help, she slipped through the wire to freedom. Others were not as lucky. The border became more dangerous. Still, the escape attempts continued. Hagen Kosch guarded the border in East Germany in 1961.
Und so sind die Menschen zu Hunderten einfach über den
People simply crossed the border by the hundreds
Wege kannten, über Hinterhöfe, durch Gärten.
because they knew ways through backyards and fields that couldn't be observed.
Diesen Weg über die Erde.
Orders were given to block these above-ground paths with larger obstacles.
Slowly but surely, concrete blocks replaced the barbed wire. Within a few weeks, it became painfully clear that the Berlin Wall was there to stay. Eva Klein, a citizen of East Germany, was concerned.
No one knew the wall was going to be built. We thought, after the flood of refugees quieted down, they would take the wall back down again.
The city was ringed by barbed wire and guarded by East German soldiers. Wolfgang Fuchs had managed to rescue Selina, but he still had fellow students and friends trapped on the other side of the wall. He became a man with a mission. He was desperate to get all the people he knew out of East Berlin. But crossing the border had become a nightmare. East German troops were ordered to shoot anyone who tried to defect. Within weeks, a dozen people were killed as they attempted to flee to the west.
So kommen dann die Leute auf die Idee,
People decided that it was no longer possible above ground. Death was too great a risk. So they sought other ways, other alternatives.
The deaths frightened everyone, but it hardened the resolve of men like Wolfgang Fuchs and his friend, Wolfgang Kockrow. Kockrow shared Fuchs' hatred of oppression.
Ich war so voller Zorn und so voller Abwehr gegenüber diesem System.
We hated the communist system. The wall just confirmed that 17 million people were living in an internment camp.
Bestätigt hat, dass jetzt 17 Millionen Menschen wie in
They couldn't laugh at the wrong place or at the wrong time.
Sie müssen essen, was es gibt. Sie können nicht lachen an der falschen Stelle.
They couldn't trust anyone, and they couldn't say what they wanted.
Fuchs and his friends were desperate to get everyone they knew out of East Germany, and quickly. The wall was becoming better fortified by the day. Climbing over the wall was now impossible. Fuchs and his colleagues discussed going under it instead. They studied the sewer tunnels that crossed the border. But the East Germans had already sealed them.
It was at that time, in 1962, that younger people, students, started looking for other ways across. They came up with the idea of digging tunnels.
Tunneling under the wall was a bold but dangerous plan. The risk of discovery was huge. East German spies were everywhere. They prowled West Berlin, listening for conspiracy plans. Fuchs and his team dug a 30-meter tunnel from a basement in West Berlin to a building on the other side of the wall. Once the tunnel was declared safe, Fuchs began bringing people through.
Kommen! Hier.
They were ecstatic. But success was all too brief. The East Germans discovered the tunnel and destroyed it. They had successfully stopped the influx of defectors through the tunnel. But they had not stopped the man who built it, Wolfgang Fuchs. In the early 1960s, brave West Germans were willing to risk everything to bring their friends and family to freedom. Wolfgang Fuchs' first tunnel had been discovered and destroyed. But by late 1963, he had already planned his second. Fuchs located a vacant bakery slated for demolition. Secrecy was essential. East German guards watched for signs of escape. Discovery meant imprisonment or death.
Was sagen Sie?
Posing as a photographer, he struck a deal with the building owner.
That's good.
He rented the basement as a darkroom. The bakery was in full view of the East Berlin watchtowers. Fuchs and his men would have to keep a low profile. The tunnel diggers would live in the basement for the duration of the mission. Fuchs also made certain that everyone who worked on the tunnel had friends or family in the East. That way, no one would inform on them. With his security in place, Fuchs now faced the sheer physical challenge of the task ahead.
Beweg dich.
The no-man's zone around the wall had been widened. They would have to dig a tunnel 145 meters long to reach an abandoned building in East Berlin. That was 5 times as long as Fuchs' first tunnel. Once they broke through, he intended to smuggle 120 people out of East Berlin in 3 nights.
2 Kilometer flussabwärts.
Excavation would take months. The mountain of dirt had to be kept in the bakery to avoid detection. It would eventually fill the entire basement and part of the first floor.
Man muss sich vorstellen, da unten durch ein Alt-Berlin in...
You have to imagine what was involved in digging a tunnel 12 meters deep through Old Berlin.
Was da an Kanalisation ist.
There were old sewage systems, old electrical cables, foundation wires. It was difficult work.
The heroic mission was delayed by problems.
Was ist los?
The sandy soil wouldn't support a long tunnel. It was an unstable, claustrophobic shaft with no room to turn around. They needed lumber to shore up the walls and ceiling. It was smuggled in under the noses of the East German guards.
Schnell, schnell, schnell.
Bucket by bucket, week after week, 30 volunteers worked in shifts around the clock. Supplies and food were financed by private citizens and anti-communist organizations.
Und ja, also die haben wirklich unter extrem
They had to do this under extreme secrecy.
Das muss man sich wirklich so vorstellen. Die Frau von Wolfgang Fuchs.
Wolfgang Fuchs' wife, Selina, brought food and supplies to the tunnel. She always arrived with a man, acting like a pair of lovers so they wouldn't be noticed.
As the tunnel grew deeper, so did the danger. Ventilation and artificial lights had to be brought in for the workers.
Die Luft dort unten war so dünn.
The air underneath was so thin that it would extinguish your cigarette. You couldn't afford any equipment. An exhaust system had to be made from scratch. People worked in 8-day shifts in the grime.
They dug for 5 months. Only a few meters away, East German guards watched for signs of escape. So far, Fuchs had been lucky. His tunnel was holding up. The tunnel now stretched to over 100 meters. But the work seemed never ending. Then a digger hit a drain pipe with his shovel. They had finally reached their target in East Berlin. From here, they would simply follow the pipe to the surface. The crew was elated. Still, they knew their job was only half over. The real danger lay ahead.
The most dangerous time for them was the opening of the tunnel on the east side, because they never knew if the State Security Service was informed about the existence of this tunnel, and whether the Stasi were awaiting them in the basement to arrest them.
On October 2nd, Fuchs used a dummy to see if East German rifles awaited him on the other side.
We had broken through into this old, closed-up outhouse. The tunnel was opened on October 2nd. It's difficult to describe the tension we felt when we reached the end of the tunnel.
Once they determined the coast was clear, the team embarked on an awesome task. Fuchs and his diggers had already compiled a list of friends and loved ones they intended to liberate from East Germany. On October 3rd, the first refugee received a telegram. It contained coded directions. As instructed, he went to the train station and studied the timetable. A stranger arrived and pointed to the name of a city mentioned in the telegram. The refugee responded with a pre-arranged password. He was then led to the building that hid the mouth of the tunnel. The password was his ticket inside.
Tokyo.
At the last possible moment, the team revealed the tunnel itself. The refugee slipped away to a new life in the West. 28 East Berliners escaped through the tunnel the night of October 3rd, 1964. The next night, more would come, including 32-year-old Klaus Klein, his wife, and their 3-year-old child.
By what method we would be led to the West, I did not know. I have to admit I hoped secretly that we would be given a false passport and allowed to just walk through the border. But I had no idea that it would be a tunnel.
It would take the refugees between 10 and 30 minutes to crawl through the dark, wet passage. But West Berlin and hope lay on the other side.
I kept on crawling, but was very afraid. It was terribly difficult to crawl through this tunnel because everywhere there were things which people had taken along. In their fear, they did want to take some things with them, but dropped them on the way, and we had to crawl over all of these things.
Once they reached the West, the refugees were cleaned up. They had to be presentable on the street. When they left the bakery, they emerged as free Germans.
Weinen, Hals fallen. There was crying and hugging. There was an indescribable feeling of happiness and joy. People were hugging each other. Some of the people were relatives that had not seen each other for a very long time.
Over the next 48 hours, 23 men, 31 women, and 3 children crawled to their freedom on their bellies. But Wolfgang Fuchs knew that with each person who disappeared from East Germany, the danger of discovery skyrocketed. It had taken 6 long months, but Wolfgang Fuchs had realized his dream of building a tunnel to freedom. On October 5th, that dream would turn into a nightmare. Late that night, 2 nervous strangers approached the gate. They claimed they wanted to defect, but they didn't know the password. The gatekeeper mistook their nervousness for sincerity and admitted them. Suddenly, one of the men said he wanted to go get a friend who had lost his nerve. Both strangers excused themselves and left. The gatekeeper let them leave. From his observation post on a nearby rooftop, Wolfgang Fuchs spotted trouble. The 2 strangers had returned. They were accompanied by East German border guards armed with submachine guns. Frantic, Fuchs tried to warn his friends of the approaching danger, but his radio failed. The East Germans went straight to the building that housed the entrance to the tunnel. One of Fuchs' men fired a warning shot. In the firefight that ensued, Egon Schultz, an East German soldier, was killed.
It was always claimed in the East that this Egon Schultz, this border soldier, was killed by criminal West Berliner slave traders. That was the spin.
Documents released more than 25 years later revealed that Schultz was killed accidentally by the other border guard submachine gun. The tunnel was destroyed by East German authorities. In West Berlin, it earned the nickname Tunnel 57 for the 57 who dared to make the journey. In its 2 days of operation, it was the most successful escape route of its kind. Wolfgang Fuchs continued to help people escape until the early 1970s. He lived under the constant threat of capture until the wall came down in 1989. he now enjoys a quiet life. His courage helped reunite hundreds of friends and family separated by the Berlin Wall.